Hey everybody, welcome to episode 7 of the Roaming Viking podcast. On today's episode, we have James LaFond back again. It was a fun podcast, but before we get into the podcast, there's something I really want to talk about. Right now, the FCC is trying to kill net neutrality, and I don't care whether you agree with me or not. I don't care whether you're right-wing, left-wing, libertarian. I don't care if you're a monkey riding a unicycle. This affects all of us. We need to protect net neutrality because if we don't, we're all going to be paying out the ass. Because, think about it. If a corporation doesn't like what another site is doing, they can, slow it down as much as they want if they can't pay for it. Or if they want to start holding Facebook ransom, guess what? We may have to start paying for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It will no longer be free to us. Netflix would probably go up because I believe it's Comcast who owns Hulu, and guess what? Netflix is a direct competitor to Hulu. So we really, really need to stop them from killing net neutrality. So please go to savethenet.org, I believe. I'll provide links in the description below. All right, so here we are with James LaFond.
Thanks for coming back.
Well, thanks for stopping over, Corey, and I really appreciate the fact that after some of my neighbors have accused me of being a white supremacist, that you shaved your head before you came over, so now they all know for sure that I'm
solidarity, solidarity.
I got this gigantic bald-headed dude knocking on my door. And I guess this is your case with your C4, and your pipe bombs are in that case. And this is probably what we use to, what we triangulate our targets with that laptop.
Triangle targets right there, yeah. Oh, god damn. So what's been going on with you?
Continuing decrepitude, trying to make sure that I don't blow my knees out. I ruined my knees last year working in a squat position for a few months after I injured my hip running for a bus, and which I'm too old and fat to do now. And I'm going to start working in the supermarket business. I talked to my boss about it like 2 months ago, and he was really cool. He said, put in your 2 weeks notice on January 1st so I can pay you for next year's vacation. And I'm training a guy that's going to replace me right now. And, it's all good. I'm going to reduce the taxes I pay to Uncle Sam and to the People's Republic of America a lot. In fact, I won't be paying any taxes. So I'm going to live on less money, and I'm going to travel. Okay. So I think I'm going to spend the summer months taking a tour of various dying American cities. A reader in New Jersey has actually offered to give me a tour of all the worst shitholes in New Jersey. So I'm really thrilled about that.
So Canton.
He said Trenton.
Okay, Trenton.
And he named some other places. I'm thrilled. So I'm going to try to finish most of the books I've been working on this winter and early this spring, and then start doing books about places where I go in the summer.
Okay, damn. Shit.
And then I'll try to. I have to get back. I'm not taking my cane with me. Okay, the tea cane is staying here, and I think the pimp cane's pretty ostentatious, so that'll stay here. So I'm going to have to get back here before cold weather next year, or else I'll be hobbling along without a cane. So I'll probably spend, from Thanksgiving till Easter in Baltimore, and then head out again to some other wretched place.
Okay. So first stop, New Jersey, I guess?
It looks that way.
Okay.
There's a burial ground I want to go to again and do a video up in Flushing, New York. Miss Queen Franklin's going to take me there.
Mm-hmm.
There's a couple places in Pennsylvania where I need to go to finish. I need to finish interviewing a couple of people for books on their life. Mm-hmm. I want to get in shape so that Sean can properly beat the shit out of me this coming summer. Then I'll probably... I have relatives that live as far west as Illinois. Mm-hmm. I'll probably get on a bus from Illinois in July and then head out west. But the first part of the May and June, I'll probably just be visiting people in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, New York.
Okay.
That I know.
All right. Well, speaking of traveling out west, I mean, I remember you told me how you went out to Montana.
Yes.
Or that area. I mean, I absolutely forgot what you were doing out there, but...
two guys that were both... the one guy used to be an officer in the Army Rangers, but they were both worked as hunting guides, and they hunted since they were 5 years old. Mm-hmm. The one guy used to hunt for rabbits. For instance, when him and his family went out cutting down Christmas trees to sell to the city people, he would supply the camps with rabbit meat. Mm-hmm. He was doing that when he was 5, so these guys had read my site, and they gave me a tour through... We were based mostly in Cody, Wyoming, and mm-hmm. we went through Yellowstone. We went to Cook City, Montana, which would just be great for a last day on Earth horror movie. Really hot Romanian waitresses working in this little town that's like 2 blocks long and half a block wide between a river and a mountain.
Okay.
There was a little dirt bike that I figured the only survivor is going to be a Romanian waitress. She weighs about 85 pounds. She could get on that little dirt bike and get out of there while we're all getting butchered, you know. So.
Okay. The way it's supposed to be.
Hot chicken skates while the dudes are getting butchered. Yeah.
Oh.
And we went up to Red Lodge, Montana, because I want to do a series of books on liver-eating Johnson and the other Wendigo character, Lewis Wetzel, who was a famous killer of the Shawnees and other Indian tribes. So I wanted to work on books on them. I'd never seen a train, and I was lucky enough to have these readers that grew up out there. I went back again this year, and I was based above Salt Lake City, Utah. And we stayed in Utah the whole time because I want to see more different types of terrain.
Okay.
And not travel as far. The guy that invited me out was in between getting both of his knees replaced. He had just got one done, and the other one's blowing up on him. So we weren't going to be traveling great distances.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm trying to get out of retail, so I can avoid my knees blowing out on me. I did pretty good with my knees. Didn't really start to go until this past year. Oh, okay.
But I kept my weight under 160 pounds for most of the 33 odd years that I worked in retail, and that was probably the biggest thing. I trashed my metabolism with, the weird sleep schedule.
Yeah.
And making weight when I was younger, so
yeah.
And then the hip injury caused me to put on more weight, and here I am. So
I know the feeling from all the injuries. I mean, my heaviest was 410. I mean, but
what are you down to now? You look like 350.
Around that, give or take, like 5-10 pounds.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, from working night shift the past 9 months, it fucked everything up for me. But now I'm working in the meat room again, so.
That's the other famously unhealthy venue. If you want to meet an early grave working in supermarkets, you either work on the night crew
or the meat room. Yeah, I've noticed. Especially during the holidays. I mean, I got a great workout the past 2 weeks with all the freaking turkeys. God damn, I think I was probably weighing up about half to a full ton of turkeys every day.
Get out of it before you're 40.
I'm trying to get out of it before I'm 30, so I'm hopefully by April.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's an easy job, but it sucks.
Wow. I managed to, raise a family on it, so I don't have any complaints. I learned a lot about idiots, which has been very useful for me with my writing.
Oh,
I
yeah.
have endless character sketches for cannon fodder in my various hyper-violent stories. So.
Yeah. I mean, I got a lot of idiots in my store. I mean, a bunch of people who think they're rich, but aren't. And people who are asking me what's the difference between a fresh and a frozen turkey. I mean, it's shit like that.
My favorite are the people that work in supermarkets who think they're more intelligent than the rich.
Oh, God.
I really like that.
I got a few of them there, but I'm not going to get into that.
I worked side by side with this guy for 6 years, and for an hour every day he would stand there and complain to me about how stupid the store manager was.
Were you the store manager?
No,
oh.
no. I got that too. I got a lot of direct complaints about how stupid I was. But I'm looking at this guy who's making $20,000 a year complaining about how stupid this store manager is who's making $120,000 a year. And he's also reducing his currency in the eyes of that man, because that man reviews video footage of the store, and he surely noticed at one point that for an hour every day he paid Rob to complain to me about how stupid he was. So, I'm sure that was being deducted from the ledger. This guy was like, he's slated for no raises for the next 10 years just based on that.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and he always had the premises of his every discussion was how much smarter he was than the guy running the place. And I would just egg him on. I just liked it. I would egg him on in different ways to develop different character sketches and responses. If I can write as many novels as I want to, I'm going to have need for a lot of corporals and privates and sergeants that are going to be griping about, the wrong turn they made down the canyon.
Then while they're falling, it's just like, why'd you make that turn, Corporal?
Right, or just talking about how stupid the Indians are right before they get ambushed.
Oh yeah. Oh God.
So it's useful. It's useful. And the people I work for, they treat me great. Back when I had 6 jobs, this was my favorite of those 6 jobs. So I went back there and asked them for a job again when I decided to go into semi-retirement and just work enough to pay rent and eat garbage. So they've been treating me nice. And most supermarkets, when you put in your 2 weeks, they tell you to get lost.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that.
Right. I mean, you're not even allowed to put in your 2 weeks. And I don't know why they do this. I guess there's different reasons why people do it, but I gave Larry, like 4 months notice, and he said, stay 2 more weeks, and I can give you even more money. And so that's nice. So they're decent people. We just got in. Mr. Greeley just bought these 2 lanes of the self-checkout registers. And we have a lot of working class people in the neighborhood. And the one lady said, I don't feel comfortable using this. You're going to get rid of employees because you have this. And Larry said, the man that owns this store told me and told my boss together, told us that we're not to cut back any hours. This is just to take pressure off the express lane and shorten the lines. And we're not going to go and expand this. This is just to get people with small orders out of here quicker.
Yeah.
So that's what kind of people they're really rare. And I was lucky enough to, finish out my term in the grocery business working for them.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had managers like that. Mine told me to wear a hat because hair would fall into the food. And as you can see, there's no hair up here. I work for idiots.
All right. Well, every time I get my head shaven, none of the black dudes at work will talk to me. They all run and hide.
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's really ridiculous. It's I don't know what kind of video games or TV shows they're watching, but if you're white and you're not constantly apologizing about it and you shave your head, it's like they run and hide. It's really ridiculous.
Yeah.
I'm holding the door open for them. I'm saying good morning, and they're like, they're looking at me like I'm Hannibal Lecter, and I just fired up the frying pan.
Yeah, it's insane what's going on right now.
So there you go.
Yeah. Oh, damn. So, we're at 313 homicides in the city.
We went 6 or 7 days with none. And Mesquite Franklin was here. It was last week, and then all of a sudden we had one up.
Mm-hmm.
And then the cop got killed.
Oh, God.
The next day. And I've actually talked to somebody who's with the Baltimore City Police Department.
Mm-hmm.
And he said he doesn't know anything about any of these cases, but he just gave me a bunch of bullet points on gossip, on what's going around, what seems to be general, either knowledge might be the wrong word, but suspicion amongst people in the Baltimore City Police Department.
Okay.
And it's not good. For one thing, Suter, the guy that got killed,
Mm-hmm.
he was scheduled to testify against a federal agent in a drug case on Thursday.
Oh.
He pulled this guy over, and he had 28 ounces of heroin on him. The guy's a federal agent. The source that talked to me told me that the crooked ring of cops, those 7 that got busted in Baltimore that were on that special squad,
Yeah.
that there's a group of those guys also operating in Philadelphia. And that they're actually the people linking these cities together are some crooked federal cops. We just had, a month ago, we had a D.C. cop who lives in Baltimore was executed at 3:30 in the morning.
God damn.
And that's not, we hardly heard a peep about that. That was in the news for one day. I mean, he's a Baltimore resident and he's a cop. He was like an 18-year veteran.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't make that much difference that he's doing it 30 miles down the road, being a cop down there. He was probably one of the guys that was helping out during the riots.
Yeah.
And we haven't heard anything about that. The homicide detective that went over to talk to this dude, and then the dude he went to talk to, because it looked like witness intimidation. They're trying to develop potential sources for an old investigation of a shooting in Harlem Park, and this guy's skulking around discouraging people, apparently. He goes over to talk to him. His partner, who wasn't his partner, just let him walk over there to this little green space between these buildings. And the guy takes his gun off of him and shoots him in the head with it and leaves. He's supposedly injured, but they won't specify what kind of injury it's supposed to be. The guy that's not his partner was assigned to him because his regular partner couldn't be with him for that day. Then he tries to drive him to the emergency room and gets in a wreck. And they got to pry this dude out of the car, okay, before they can even get him under care. So the whole thing just seems bizarre.
God damn.
And we've had 2 family members out in Hartford County, right along Route 40, where a lot of those motels are just like places where drug people live.
Yeah.
You'll see them cooking out there and everything along Route 40. This guy, he basically raised his niece as his daughter. He's like, you know, in his mid-30s. She's 15. She got killed a couple weeks ago, and he gets run over by a guy who speeds away on Route 24 just yesterday. And the cops actually think they have a lead, that they have an idea that this might be associated. But all this stuff just sounds to me like stuff that would go on in Mexico or South America.
Yeah. God damn.
Yeah, so it's just bizarre. But I'm glad to hear that the boys are hitting 313. It's almost to December.
Yeah.
I think I predicted 340. I'm not sure.
Well, you never know in this city. I mean, we are more accurate than Chicago, so
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. I mean, we don't spray and pray. We actually take aim and...
Well, you're usually shooting your best friend in the back of the head while you're walking into the convenience store.
True.
So I think that
Yeah.
helps a little bit.
Hey.
I like the last time they had the truce. The first time they did the truce, some dude guns down like 4 people, like right in the middle of the truce. And then the next truce held, but there were a couple killings daylight in the morning on Monday. And then the next truce they did, some woman got shot in East Baltimore right at midnight. It was like a minute, right?
Can't ever win.
What's the point? And I'll have to break down the numbers and have Steve do the stats for me. But it seems like we've had more killings during the week than on the weekend this year. And I think that's different. I think that's a change. It's definitely a change in the proportions from what it used to be.
Okay.
Just a couple of years ago, we'd go through most of a week without any killings, and that's why they structured these truces from Friday 12 a.m. till Sunday midnight.
Yeah.
Because that's when all the killing was happening. So maybe this is just a way to get around the truces and say, yes, Mom, I'm not going to shoot anybody, and then do it on Monday.
Hey, you know what? It's better than nothing. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to walk out your door and just not have to worry about, well, hopefully not worry about getting shot.
Well, did you know about the guy over off of Bowie's Lane towards Armstead Gardens?
Honestly, there's so much stuff going on, I can't keep up.
He's a Baltimore City cop.
Mm-hmm.
It was during the day. He was at home asleep. It's not that far from Archbishop Curley, where I met you.
Uh-huh.
This guy, and you know what? They call this a burglary. They call it an armed burglary.
Uh-huh.
Okay, it's not a burglary if somebody's home and you're confronting him. It's a home invasion.
Yeah.
But the Baltimore City Police called it an armed burglary. Mm-hmm. This guy wakes up, and this kid's holding a gun to his head. He's in bed, and he wakes up to a gun to his head. He takes the gun off the guy and kills him. And the police, they went out of their way to try to keep the legal dogs off of this guy so he wouldn't get in any trouble because of it. Mm-hmm. But they still refuse to call it a home invasion. They call it an armed burglary. And, to me, an armed burglary would be a really narrow category where you're carrying a weapon on you in case the owner attacks you or something. Not that you're bringing a weapon in you to subdue people.
Yeah.
And in Baltimore County, we've had a lot of home invasions where women have been physically robbed inside of their home and have had things taken out of their hands and off of the table they were sitting at, and it was called a burglary when that's a home invasion.
The hell?
So, well, I guess it's really, it's just juking the numbers to muddy the statistical waters at the end of the year. But that's, I'm looking closer at the murders and stuff like that than I did last year. We had a few, as far as the murder bowl goes, we had a few tragic instances where these stupid hood rats actually went against cops, like the one I just described.
Yeah.
And they get killed, and it's a waste because it doesn't go on the murder bowl stats. Mm-hmm. So it doesn't help us against Chicago or really Flint. Flint's probably a real competition.
Oh yeah, Flint's probably a competition. Right?
So if you're going to go out there and do something stupid and get shot, you should have another civilian shoot you, not a police officer. That way you go into the books as a homicide. Yeah.
God damn.
I mean, if there was a locker room, I think I would give a speech.
Yeah.
And say, hey guys, it's not getting us anywhere having you guys going after the cops.
Yeah. Don't go after the cops, aim your shots, get into the books.
Yeah. If you want to matter, there be a homicide.
Goddamn.
Not a just,
And I remember hearing somewhere there was 23 confirmed hitters in the city or something like that, or.
Oh, it was either last year or the year before last. I think it was last year because I was following a case. Justin Fenton did a really good job following this one murder investigation. It was 2 detectives. He went along with them on their interviews and everything. I didn't follow it to the conclusion because something came up that I had to spend a lot of time working on. But it was about all the friction that these detectives faced getting witnesses to speak to them. And it was during that article where he quoted somebody at the Baltimore City Police Department claiming that there were, I think the number was 143, that there were 143 known trigger pullers. I think they were calling them trigger pullers in this, or it could have been shooters, these were people that the police department was certain that they have shot people before, but as with these detectives trying to get information out of the family of the deceased, even the family of the deceased won't help with the investigation. So it's very difficult to to be able to get an indictment on these guys will stick. So they went to calling them known trigger pullers and known shooters.
Okay.
And it was over 100. It was around 140. And, you know, the 143, I don't know why it's in my brain. That could be something from that could be like the number of slave revolts in the 1800s or something, for all I know, because the numbers tend to get mixed up in my brain.
Yeah, I mean, especially with all the numbers that are coming out right now. I mean, it's with everything that's coming out, it's hard to keep up with everything. I mean, from everything that's happening on the national level and everything that's happening just in the city. I don't know.
Well,
I can't.
I think there's some method to that madness. I'm a crackpot after all.
Yeah, I know you are a crackpot. It's why I enjoy talking with you.
All right, so.
God damn.
Yeah, don't get me started on the now forgotten Vegas shooting.
Okay, I'll get you started on that.
There's a 911 call from the airport that they have live shooter on the tarmac.
From the airport.
From the airport at the same time this is going on. The week of the investigation, a couple of FBI agents get greased in a car accident. Shep sent me video footage of, it looked like a mixed squad of regular cops and tactical cops and just two plain clothes putzes walking in with a bag and a stretcher into some other casino, and they're pointing their assault rifles at people at the craps tables and telling them to step off. And they're just walking up into this casino that's not the one where the shooting happened. Yeah, I think it's something like 8 people that claim that they saw another shooter have now either disappeared or been killed in some accident, or they died of a 28-year-old heart failure in their bed on Monday morning.
Yeah, I mean, from the videos I saw, I mean, it looked from the videos that there was another shooter, because there's no way, just from the amount of people that have died and the amount of bullets that were fired, there's no way one person could have done all that, even with a bump stock.
I saw one Navy SEAL, and actually I think Ann Coulter's got the best idea. You can maybe look her up and link to it. She wrote an article about this. She probably has the best idea about this guy Paddock. That he was just there to do an arms deal with somebody, and then whoever he thought was going to be coming there to buy guns popped him, and then they did the deed. There was room service for 2 ordered a couple days before the shooting for that room. He checked in before the police said he checked in, and then they backtracked on that. The guy that was the security guard that was supposedly shot during the shooting, turns out was shot before the shooting. The police backtracked on that. That guy wasn't even a U.S. citizen and came across the border 14 days before the shooting. You know, Paddock's got this jet plane listed with the Department of Defense or something as a hauler. So it makes him sound like an arms dealer. Yeah. Because he didn't make all that money playing video poker. Yeah. But the crazy thing, the thing that I thought was the craziest was this interview with this former Navy SEAL that was discussing how many rounds that were fired and how many people that were dropped and how many seconds this lasted. He said, I couldn't do that. You know, and the Navy SEALs expend more ammunition and training than the entire U.S. Marine Corps does during the same period of time. So these guys are really good. And he said, a guy without my experience that's that age, he said he's probably just not going to achieve that at some point. You know, there's going to be a clip is going to be fumbled or something. Yeah. You know, so it was, who knows why, but it's so bad. I think maybe the important thing about it is just witnesses are being killed and people, you know, might not remember that.
Who knows? I mean, hate to go conspiracy nut, but... Corey, I know.
Corey, I'm a writer, and you're here using a word that's not in the English language in my room. I don't know how I feel about that.
Oh, okay.
Conspiracy is not in the dictionary.
True. Really? No. Wait a second. What the hell? You messed me up on that one.
It's not in the dictionary I go by, which is the Ebonic Dictionary.
Oh, okay. All right, so I should just go into Urban Dictionary right now and try and translate everything you say. No, but seriously, this could just be this one complicated plot just to make our fearless leader look bad. I mean, I'm not a big fan of him. I'm really not. But I know a lot of people have been trying to push for stricter gun control lately. Mm-hmm. And this is a way to do it.
Yeah, that's the interesting thing is police officers were radioing back. I was listening to some of the 911 dispatches complaining that concert goers, guys in the audience, were trying to break into the police cruisers to get to the shotguns that were in the police cruisers. So you had that mentality. A person had been selected. You have a bunch of people that are, Las Vegas is urban, but what's around it isn't. So you have a bunch of people that are probably rural people that have firearms backgrounds. Yeah. And they're coming to listen to country music. So a lot of them actually try to defend themselves. And it was consternating to the police that they were doing this. It was considered a threat to the police operation. But it looks like the Vegas PD was totally victimized in this.
Mm-hmm. Goddamn.
I mean, the pictures are... People put them up on YouTube. You want to look at some of the still photos that are up there of the sheriff of the Las Vegas Police Department speaking while the FBI guy is standing behind him looking at him. It reminded me of a scene out of that old TV movie V, where you would have like the lizard aliens that looked like people on the outside. The FBI guy's face didn't even look human. And he's boring a hole through the back of this guy's head. And you can tell that this Las Vegas chief of police is not a practiced liar. He's not any good at this. He's literally sweating bullets on camera. And the way he was staring and everything, I thought it was pretty entertaining.
Okay, yeah. Now that I mention it, I do kind of remember that. It's just so long ago I can't remember.
Yeah, but so since then we've had a whole bunch of news about perverts molesting whores.
Yeah. No, let's go on to that. Why not? Yeah, this Harvey Weinstein shit.
Well, that came up then, and that hasn't stopped. That whole blooming, Hollywood is all of a sudden not, the Methodist church that we thought it was. A whole line of inquiry basically started right there 10 days in. From that shooting, right when all the misinformation is not adding up and is unraveling.
Yeah, there's so much shit going on right now. It's like I can't keep up with all of it. I mean, I know oh God, now I'm drawing a blank. Fuck.
That's what happens when you shave your head for the first time. It
happened to me too. I thought it would cool down my head that way I could think faster. Nah.
That's why the brothers rub oil in their head after they shave it. It helps. It helps you retain what you got in there.
All right, I'll make sure to try that next. No, but yeah, I'm not surprised with everything that's going on with the Hollywood sex scandals and all that stuff. I mean, it makes sense that this shit would be happening because, look at all these high-end producers. Just look at Harvey Weinstein. Do you really think he's getting a lot of pussy? Without doing some devious shit?
Well, if you count flower pots... maybe so.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
But yeah, guys like that are going to be able to buy it. But the type of stuff that's being talked about is really not having sex. It's generally
being
aggressive perversion.
Yeah.
So that makes sense when you're talking about real powerful people that they can already, they can buy whatever sex they want. So. That's not going to mean anything to them. If they want to express their sense of power, it's going to have to be something that degrades somebody else.
True.
That's why I think a lot of your politicians are probably involved in child rape and stuff like that.
Yeah, what gets me is how the Hollywood shit is overshadowing what's going on with Roy Moore down in Alabama. It's like he's been accused of with a 14-year-old and multiple other teenagers, and apparently it was an open secret. This one sheriff, I believe, came out saying it was his job to keep him away from all the teenagers during football games.
Well, there was one situation where he actually asked the mother permission to interview her daughter while she was present, as to her being his wife. He was 35 and he was looking for a 16-year-old wife.
What?
Yeah, well, actually, that used to...
Oh, yeah, that used to happen a lot, yeah.
No, that used to be pretty standard.
Yeah.
You would, as soon as the girl, was physically a woman, she would be put into the baby-making role.
Yeah.
So that was not something that...
That wasn't uncommon.
Yeah, and a lot of states, there's different ages of consent, 15, 16, and 17, I think is the range depending on what state you're in. And I don't know what it is in Maryland because I always had my personal age of consent as being 21.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was 18, my age of consent was 21 because I never wanted to be locked up for being a pervert.
Same here. I mean, Grant, when I was 18, I was like, 18? Okay. Then when I turned 19, the consent was 19. And then when it went to 21, it just stayed at 21 for me.
Right. So that's prudent.
Yeah.
Now I think my age of consent is 41.
At least they know what they're doing. God damn. Just from my experience, it's like, I actually do prefer older women. I really do.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You can have some kind of conversation with them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because they've experienced some shit, and hey.
So you have the ability to have limited conversation with a semi-intelligent being.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of the other stuff you do with them is...
that's always a good thing, yeah.
And there tends to be less delusion as far as what men are like. So they're not as likely just to go crazy and try to run you over when things go south.
Yeah.
Yeah, the younger chicks, the chicks in their 20s, are more dangerous when it comes to coming after you with knives. And
I've had a few friends who have some stab wounds.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary shit.
Right, so you got to watch out how you manage the inferior sex.
Okay. Okay. I'll just leave that one alone right there.
What is called the He-Man's burden. Okay.
Okay, the He-Man's burden. All right.
It's the He-Man's burden. I had one of my, my landlord actually researched me after the neighbors came to him with charges of me being a white supremacist.
Uh-huh.
And he talked to a mutual friend of ours that's, he's well connected politically, and he's well collected. And he actually reads my site. Steve, after 15 minutes, actually has to run away from having a conversation with me because I'm too out there for him. But Curtis can actually hold a conversation with me for a while. He enjoys it. I'm like a rare insect in his collection that he enjoys seeing twittering around. And he told Steve, he said, no way is he a white supremacist, but if anybody comes after him for being a misogynist, I'll have to say that that's an accurate.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I mean, I would have to agree with him on that one.
Now, the definition of misogyny, there's, it's not just one definition. I don't trust women. Mm-hmm. Okay, period. I do not trust women. I don't trust my mother. Mm-hmm. I don't trust the woman I'm in love with. I do not trust them because they're more subject to chemistry and emotion. And I guess maybe that's a chemical thing. I don't know. So they're more likely to go out of control. That you can't get the type of iron discipline out of a woman that you can get out of a man. He'll choke it down and he'll take a year off of his life and not go scream at the cop. Okay?
Yeah.
Unless he's been raised by a crazy woman, and they'll do it and he'll get shot, and it's a national tragedy. Mm-hmm. But women, they can tell you, they can tell you 100 times, I will not yell at anybody else when I'm driving, when you're in the car, because I don't want you to have to go to prison. And when somebody cuts them off, they can't help it. They got to start yelling and screaming. And they're all, not all women will yell and scream in a road rage situation. But the ones that are prone to, they can't make that promise. I won't do it. Uh-huh. They just can't make that promise. They're not capable of that level of discipline.
I mean, I know with my mom, whenever I'm driving the car and she sees someone with the pants hanging below their ass, it's like, oh crap, am I gonna have to stab someone?
Right. Well, if you think about it, okay, like the Gorgon Queen, who the King of New York beat out in recent selection process for the head of our hive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this chick, you can make an argument that she's not even a human being, that she's like maybe some kind of reptilian alien or something behind this like bad costuming job.
Okay, the Gorgon Queen. We're talking about Hillary, right?
You said that.
Okay.
Hey, not me.
I have complete disdain towards both of them. Okay, so and she does look like an alien, really.
She couldn't keep her cool all the time, even on television, even on clips that she knew that were going to be used against her when she knew the cameras were on her. And relatively speaking, people, her political enemies, might have made her out to be an unusually volatile woman or some crazed woman. I would say that she's probably one of the least emotional and most disciplined women that there are, because she's been able to attain a high level of projection of evil. I mean, she's even more evil than her husband was, and by definition, you have to be evil to be president, of something this big. And she didn't have the skill or self-discipline to compete with these guys that she ran against. But she came close. She was in the running. She was in an election that was actually contested. It was not a foregone thing. Most people thought that she was going to win it. So that shows that she had a very high level of discipline.
Yeah.
But
especially
not
for the level of rigging that's come out.
And you think about it, a guy like Trump that runs his mouth a lot.
Yeah.
Would still, a lot of his mouth running is not just off the cuff. He makes it look that way.
Yeah, I know.
He's much more disciplined than the most disciplined woman in politics. And he's literally looks like a loose cannon. When he was on the debate stage and he was tramping around and all, he seems like a very emotive man.
Yeah.
But he's like a piece of iron compared to the most disciplined women.
Yeah.
And I just think it's why men and women work good together, as long as they don't expect, we don't want our women to be like Hillary Clinton. And, a well-adjusted woman doesn't want a man to be her best girlfriend. He wants him to be a man. And so a large portion, I think, of what the problem is in our society is most women have been raised and educated to think that their man should be their best girlfriend. Instead of being two different types of human being, they're supposed to be the same thing. And just one's a little bit bigger and harder than the other one, and that's it. And we're supposed to believe that. And there's no difference in our brain chemistry.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, I've been way too deep into this shit. Apparently there's some idiot, Jordan Peterson debated him like about a year and a half ago. He's a psychologist out of, I think, University of Toronto.
And I'm familiar with Jordan Peterson. I've seen him on Stefan Molyneux, and I've seen him on some of his own lecture presentations.
Yeah, but apparently he debated this one, honestly, I can't keep up with all the acronyms. But
so he's one of the 16 genders?
16? 72.
Oh my. 72.
I think that was the last time I checked. There's probably like 500 more. No, but who was a historian of medicine, not even a doctor. And this guy was trying to say there's no biological difference between men and women other than the reproductive parts. It baffles my mind with all these SJW assholes.
Right. Well, you could talk to any orthopedic surgeon and I can tell you the difference between men and women just mechanically on that level.
I know.
Yeah, one thing that's interesting, I didn't realize there's really like 72 gender designations now.
Yeah, well, that was the last time I checked.
Okay, there was a fascinating book I read about the French Revolution and what became Haiti. By Lothrop Stoddard, and he was going over the racial politics in the island. And we're familiar with, in America, you had the designation of, you had somebody that was considered a Negro, then you had somebody that was considered a mulatto, which was half and half. And that's usually about as far as they went.
Yeah.
But there were the quatroons and the octoroons. Okay, so there's 1/2, there's 1/4, and there's 1/8. Black, and their system is, and it's still the same system they use for determine if you're a Native American or not, or in Louisiana, for instance, to determine if you're an African American or not. If you're only 1/17 American Indian, or only 1/17 from sub-Saharan Africa, then you could be considered Caucasian. So there's like still really no legal mixed race definition in America. But the French system that they had in the French colonies, there were, according to Stoddard, there were 64 grades of the octoroon, because they had the population divided between white, Negro, and mulatto. And then amongst the mulattoes, you had not just the 3 big categories, but then a whole bunch of other ones. And there would be specialists in charge of figuring this out, because you couldn't just go by genealogy. You had to be able to look at somebody, because all these people had no genealogy. They didn't even have birth records. And it was a horror story.
Yeah, well, I hate saying this, but that actually makes sense, because kind of scientifically accurate, because it's like just
well, they made an attempt. It was a different way of dividing people.
Yeah.
The attempt to divide people in the French system is, we're going to have the whites lording it over the blacks, but we're also going to have an intermediary group, the mulatto slave owners, and there were mulatto generals, and there was a mulatto president of Haiti when it became Haiti. These guys were traditionally more cruel to the blacks than the whites were to the blacks, and the whites were horrifically cruel to the blacks in Haiti. All the things they did to them was just disgusting. They had to bring in, to keep the population stable, and now at 500,000, you had 500,000 blacks. To keep these 500,000 blacks at that population level to work all these plantations, keeping in mind that they were breeding, you had to bring in 117 slave ships a year.
Okay.
That's how many they were working to death and executing and torturing to death in this system. And it was a really brutal system, because the first thing you did, it was mostly sugarcane, is you handed this dude a machete. A sugarcane machete when he got off the boat. So some of these guys would just immediately run off into the jungle in the mountains above the coffee plantations, and they become Maroons. And we had them as far north as Virginia. We had Maroons in America, and these are tribal Africans, full-blooded tribal Africans, armed with machetes, right off the boat, not even speaking English, living out in the woods. And you had a lot of this in America, and in all the Caribbean islands, it was very common. So in Haiti, you'd have the whites, you'd have the Maroons, you'd have the mulattoes, and then you had the Negroes at the bottom. And then the whites were broken up into different factions. So you had that way of dealing with things. And in America, after the things settled out pretty much with the Indian population, it was a lot more complicated when you had active Indian tribes still in the conflicts. But in the eastern United States, once you had gotten rid of the Indians, the system of segregation they used was to encourage both sides to go with their instincts. The minority, because you have to understand that we think of the black slaves being in the majority. They were the minority of the population. Even in the South, they were only 1/3 of the population. Even now, they're only 13% of the national population. The minority wants to grow. They want to be bigger. So everybody that's even got an ounce or 1 drop of black blood in them, all the other blacks want them on their side, because they want to grow their group. And the aristocracy, the elite, which is all identified with being white, they wanted to be exclusive. So by having this 1 drop rule, what it does is it triggers the exclusivity impulse on the part of the elite, and it triggers the mob impulse on the part of the minority who wants to get bigger. And it just, Frederick Douglass's big dream was, he was half and half. He was half white and half black, and he called himself a mulatto. His dream was there would be so many people like him that were mixed race that they could actually work as a dynamic group for racial equality. Instead of being used for a divisive set-aside group like the French did it. And I think W.E.B. Du Bois tried to work on this model too, but eventually became disillusioned. But the gravity on both sides socially, these groups are, and we still have it today. You talk to 10 black people and 10 white people, and 9 of the blacks and 8 of the whites are going to say somebody that's got any black ancestry is all black. And I had this discussion with my cousin because he was upset that his grandfather never told him that he was black. And I said, your grandfather was not black. I knew your grandfather. Okay, your grandfather was mixed race. My guess is he was a quadroon.
Mm-hmm.
We thought he was like Greek or Italian or something.
Okay.
You know, I mean, it's there was a joke in our family when we were wondering why Uncle Bernie, who was a real racist, he hated black people. He would make jokes. He would make racial jokes, and then he would like apologize to Uncle Robert. And he's like, I'm just kidding, right, buddy? And we had a conversation with my mother when we were little kids on the way home about Uncle Robert's appearance, who, if you looked at my Uncle Robert, he looks like somebody that would be regarded as Mediterranean today. He looked like an ancient Israeli or a modern Greek.
Mm-hmm.
And he's got an olive-complected skin, and he didn't have kinky hair. He had curly hair, curly black hair.
Okay.
And what our grandmother, his sister-in-law, what she told us, and it was a true story, Uncle Robert was in the Merchant Marine in the Pacific during World War II.
Mm-hmm.
His ship got torpedoed. He spent 2 weeks in a life raft in the middle of the Pacific.
Fun.
So my grandmother told us and told my mother that the reason why Uncle Robert had a permanent tan was because of the 2 weeks he spent in the Pacific in the sun, because he couldn't get out of the sun.
A perfect explanation. Okay.
But there was no place for him in America, even in around 1910.
Mm-hmm.
There was no place for him other than being white or Negro. That was it. That's all he could be.
Mm-hmm.
So I told my cousin, I said, this is the only designation they allowed him. He was culturally a white Protestant.
Mm-hmm.
He came from a northern state. I think he came from Rhode Island. He was definitely the most brilliant person in their whole family.
Mm-hmm.
And he read more than anybody I know. He was a crackpot. I've kind of inherited his mantle in the family. I'm the one who clears the dining room table when Thanksgiving dinner is over and politics start. So that's a genius plan there. Frederick Douglass's dream was wrong. There was this plan that had been put in place that would self-perpetuate.
Mm-hmm.
The people that are victimized by this plan would naturally go along with it.
Uh-huh.
And what it also does is it permits the rich whites
mm-hmm.
that owned all of these black people, which kept all of these poor white people out of a job. It permitted them to share out the blame for slavery amongst the poor whites. You think about that. If you're the great-grandson
uh-huh.
of the dude who starved to death on a mountainside because he couldn't get a job because the guy down the road owned 200 guys that
mm-hmm.
could work for him for free, and he bred them, and he didn't have to buy them.
Yeah.
And now you're getting blamed for the sins of that rich bastard that owned 200 guys and kept your great-granddaddy out of work.
Yeah, shit. It's all making sense now.
So that was called the free soil argument.
Mm-hmm.
The one senator from Tennessee that voted against secession ended up becoming Abraham Lincoln's vice president and ended up becoming the president when he was assassinated, and came within one vote of being impeached for not wanting to destroy the South
mm-hmm.
completely after the Civil War. He and Lincoln didn't agree on many things, but they agreed that Reconstruction should favor bringing the South back into the Union,
mm-hmm. not
punishing it as some separate thing that could be exploited by Northern investors. So he was a leading free soil advocate. He had been a white slave. He had run away from his master. He eventually ended up becoming president of the United States. Mm-hmm. Now, he and other people that migrated down the Ohio River, they had all escaped from, people don't realize that the Ohio River is the place where people from Virginia and Pennsylvania migrated out west.
Okay.
The people from the Carolinas went over the Cumberland Gap in the Appalachians, and then people from farther south in Georgia and Florida, they just went right across the Mississippi Basin, right across that southern mm-hmm. plain below the Appalachians. So the two most popular states in before the Revolution and after the Revolution were Virginia and Pennsylvania. They were both huge slave states. You had over 200,000 white slaves in Pennsylvania, and you've got about the same number of black slaves in Virginia.
Mm-hmm.
You've got almost no black slaves in Pennsylvania, and you've got, for every 2 black slaves in Virginia, you got 1 white slave. So you have these huge populations that escape through Wheeling, West Virginia, down the Ohio River, and the first thing they do is they outlaw slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And the Congress, it's not the Continental Congress anymore, when they ratified the Constitution, they put slavery back in place.
Mm-hmm.
But these people continue to go west, and they continue to settle new areas, and they all have this really strong anti-slavery bias, and it also goes along with an anti-black bias. They don't like black people.
Mm-hmm.
They also don't like slavery. They see the plantation owners and the slave owners as lovers of black people, of wanting to spread black people in favor of white people and push white people out of work. So they actually saw the plantation master and his black slaves as like one enemy.
Okay.
And then the free white guy was against them. Because if the plantation system was allowed to spread, then the free white guy can't run a 40-acre farm, because down the road you've got a guy that's benefiting from economy and scale.
Yeah.
And he's got free labor.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you filled the ranks of the Union Army from the West. And that's one reason why, because these were like regional regiments and local regiments, that's one reason why you had so much more success in the Western theater against the Confederates from the Union, because you had more motivated troops. In the East, they're taking poor guys out of the city, largely Irish, that just came to the U.S. And these are basically conscripts in the East. In the far North, in New England, you'll have people that are fervent abolitionists, and this is kind of like a crusade to them. So you have this 3 different types of Union troops that performed at different levels. And the guys from the West, they won the war, and they won the war in the West. And then that way of fighting was brought to the East, and that finished off the Army in Northern Virginia when Grant got to the East. And then basically, he was the hammer and Sherman was the anvil, and he crushed the South between them. That all comes from the Free Soil Act. Now, Grant was like a shopkeeper somewhere in the Ohio Valley.
Yeah.
He wasn't some Ivy League dude.
Hey, I thought he did go to West Point.
Yeah. Well, he did.
He was like bottom of his class, though.
Yeah. And so I think Custer was last in his class. I love Custer.
Oh, God. No, yeah, he was.
And I think Bobby Lee was first.
Yeah, he was. Man. Oh, God damn.
Jackson was a VMI guy, I think. I'm not sure if... I know he ended up teaching at VMI. I don't know if he was a product of VMI or not.
Oh, God damn.
Yeah. So our whole view of race in this country was like warped in 1865 when this artificial narrative got imposed on top of everything. Yeah. It was the whole way of looking at it was the way that rich people from eastern cities wanted you to see it. It was what people from Philadelphia, New York, and Boston wanted the future to look back on. And in fact, all the records of the white slaves held in Pennsylvania, and according to Ben Franklin, there was over 200,000 of them, they would get sold at seasonal auctions at the county courthouse. Yeah. If you owed on your grocery bill, and you bought your clothes at the grocer too, that would, actually, I probably would have liked being a grocer back then. Being a grocer right now is not a big thing, but being a grocer 250 years ago, if anybody hadn't paid off their Tasty Cake bill, or haven't paid off their petticoat bill, then you could take them to court at the county court, and if they're found guilty of owing you the money that you have evidence that they owe you, then they'll be sold, and you'll get the product of that sale. You'll get that money. Damn. And this happened repeatedly. So you had this all these records of these people sold in Pennsylvania that Franklin was talking about. They've been destroyed. the Quaker administration in Pennsylvania was also a pioneer of the American correction system. They designed the first really big mass prisons.
Okay.
And it probably has something to do with their 150-year-long history of managing unfree Irish labor.
Yeah. Okay, now, just so everybody knows, where are you getting this information? Just so everybody knows where to find it.
Well, right now I've got it in 7 books, and I'm working on 3 more. And I've got all the sources cited in there. But you can just read the Constitution of the United States and find some of this out. I read Ben Franklin's memoirs. Right now, I'm reading a biography about Ben Franklin that was written by a guy named Thomas. I forget, his last name was just like 3 letters, and had an AY in it, in which he gives notable achievements that Franklin did. He reproduces speeches that Franklin made in England. This was a Tory from America who, after the Revolutionary War, went back to England. And when he published Franklin's biography, he took advantage of the opportunity to spend half of the book talking about how Franklin was wrong, and that what went wrong in the colonies wasn't England's fault. It was just the fault of the Americans. And so you get this posthumous debate between Franklin and this other guy. And they both agreed that the economic situation was lousy. There was no disagreement on what the economic situation was. There was no disagreement on the fact that people were being bought and sold because they couldn't afford to buy things, because everything they bought had to come from England. You couldn't even manufacture local stuff.
Yeah.
It was this mercantilist system. So there's that. That's all. I got that converted. A guy named Helpful Timvo or Lynn Lockhart converted that text for me. That will be in the appendix of Cracker Boy, which is the big white slavery book I'm working on, and I'll have that annotated in the appendix, and I'll have some of the quotes will be transferred to the main body. There's also the Planter's Plea by Thomas White, that was written in 1630. Which is about how this plantation system should be set up based on the book of Genesis and the nuclear family, and how enslaving your fellow men was good for them, your fellow Englishmen. One of the other sources is a book called it was a book by Peter Williamson called His Curious Adventures. He was kidnapped and sold when he was 13 or 14 in the 1740s, and he ended up, he was bought by a guy who gave him his freedom and actually adopted him as a son and gave him an inheritance. Wow. And he ends up being captured by Delaware Indians when the French and Indian War breaks out. Okay. And you find out through reading his text that almost nobody in Pennsylvania that works the land has a weapon. They're not armed because they're slaves.
Yeah.
And the slave catchers are the Delaware Indians. And the Delaware Indians changed sides. They, instead of being paid by the English and the Quakers, they're now in the pay of the French. So when they turn on you, that's your whole military turning on you. Yeah. One Indian chief, I think he only had 60 men, and he stayed loyal to the Quakers. He gave a speech in Philadelphia, which Peter Williamson recounts, in which he points out that you have many more men than your enemies, but none of them have weapons. You need to give them weapons. Yeah. And the Quakers don't want to do it because they're talking about arming their slaves.
Yeah.
And then you're going to have to get the weapons back from them. And that happened. A lot of them, you got the weapons back from them, and they were sold again. There's a site called Irish Old News, which has collected records of escaped servants from the Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware area and the Lancaster area. And right after the French and Indian War, half of the escaped servants are military veterans, and they're described as military veterans. These guys were sold after they fought in the war.
God damn.
Yeah, I mean, it was just disgusting. You know, in Virginia, what you see a lot of And you see it in Maryland too, but not as extensive in Virginia. You see a lot of black slaves and white slaves escaping together, and the white slave acts like he's the master. And they escape together in that manner.
That's pretty ingenious, right there.
And there's just so many interesting characters. There's a guy that was a Shakespearean stage actor, and what they'll do is they'll tell you what they did before they got bought and sold.
Okay.
And a lot of this could just be them going into debt. If you go into debt, if you borrow money for a pair of pants and you can't pay it off, if your new job doesn't work out, you can't pay it off, then you get sold at the court. So some of it's kidnapping, some of it's that involuntary debt servitude, some of it's voluntary debt servitude where you're going to starve to death. Well, if you sell yourself to this guy, at least you have something to eat. But the problem is when you're released, you have nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, because there's not really any wage labor around because of laborers like you. So these guys would get recycled. I found one guy that I think went through 5 7-year terms, it looks like, in his life. Some of them would go back to Ireland or England after their term was up. Some of them would try to head west and start a farm. Some of them would run away to live with the Indians during the piracy period. A lot of them were running away to be pirates. There were a lot of slave rebellions. This book here, American Negro Slave Revolts by Herbert Aptheker, he actually sets out to prove that, white so-called indentured servitude, which only a small majority of white slaves were indentured servants, and even indentured servants were treated exactly the same as the black slaves. They just weren't held as long. Yeah. His mission in his book is to point out how much worse black slaves had it than white servants. But what he ends up showing in that book, even though he didn't intend it, and I've annotated it, I'm going to use that in Cracker Boy also as a whole section, is that almost all of the black slave revolts had white participants. And really, most of the white slave revolts had some black participants too. Now, in some cases, there's blacks fighting on both sides.
Yeah.
In all cases, there's whites fighting on both sides. In a lot of cases, there's Indians fighting on one side or the other, usually not on both sides.
Yeah.
So it's really complex. This book here, The Peculiar Institution, Slavery in the Antebellum South by Kenneth M. Stamp. He actually, first thing he does is dispel the myth that blacks were brought in because whites were dying like flies on the plantations because it was too hot and they couldn't handle it. He points out that the labor productivity was the same with the whites and the blacks. And Washington was even trying to replace his blacks with Catholic Rhinelanders, not because the Rhinelanders worked better, but because he could keep them in Pennsylvania. When he went to Philadelphia to do business, he didn't have to free them, because if you held a black in Philadelphia for 6 months, you had to free him. But you could keep a white guy for up to 31 years, usually just 7 years. Yeah, it was really weird. There was different politics. To the Quakers, they were a Congregationalist Christian group. To them, a Catholic was somebody who has decided to become a devil worshiper. But a black person was an innocent heathen who could be converted. Okay, so somebody that has embraced damnation willingly is beyond help. They're beyond hope. But the black person is innocent, and they haven't had a chance at Christianity yet. So the real reason why, first of all, the first plantations weren't hot. The Carolinas didn't even start to get settled till after 1700. The main reason being, so almost all your colonization before 1700 happens in New England, which we include New York. I include New York with New England. You have New York, which is Dutch, New England, which is Puritan, and Maryland and Virginia. Maryland can't feed itself. Maryland is starving and can't buy any black people until 1700. There's complaints, guys, slave masters, writing letters to the governor. When can we get some blacks that are affordable enough for us to buy? We want some blacks. And it had to do with the fact that the whites that they had were so damn violent, and they kept fighting back and running away. and they wanted to get some black slaves that had already been bred to slavery on a plantation in the Caribbean. They're not thinking of African slaves. They're thinking of getting guys from Barbados. So the first blacks coming to Virginia from Barbados in 1621 or 1619, right in there, right before the Powhatans revolted. Well, so you have Virginia's not tropical, Maryland's not tropical, New York and New England's not tropical.
Definitely not tropical.
You have predominantly white slavery up until 1680. After Bacon's Rebellion, there was a concerted attempt by the elite to totally separate poor blacks and poor whites and set them at each other's throats, which expressed itself as taking as many of your free whites as you can and using them as overseers and using them as frontier Indian fighters, and then using those as slave catchers, because by this point the American Indians and the Appalachians had been so infiltrated by runaway white slaves, and they had adopted so many whites to replace losses from disease and war, that you're talking about mixed race Indians living out in the mountains, and they're no longer fulfilling the slave catching role. They're actually accepting runaways. So now you've got to promote some of your poor whites into a frontiersman role where they'll fight the Indians, one, and two, they'll serve as slave catchers. And they're going to be more willing to catch blacks than they are to catch whites, who they might adopt into their own little clan, because you have clannish people. They're Scottish and they're Irish.
Yeah.
Okay, so the whole your African slave would cost you 85 pounds, and Peter Williamson was sold for 15 pounds.
Yeah,
that's a pretty big disparity.
Yeah, it is.
And so it was a big investment, and they even made efforts to mix up tribes of Africans. You didn't want them coming from the same tribe. You wanted to come from different tribes speaking different languages. Yeah. They would deliver them naked, and it was a way to kind of attack their identity. But they did the same thing to the white kids when they came over. Your first colonies, and the best general source for this is a guy named Hoffman. He wrote a little pamphlet called "They Were White and They Were Slaves," and he goes over the numbers which come from British censuses. This guy, T.H. Breen, he wrote this thing, Puritans and Adventurers, and he, again, set out to prove that blacks had it worse than whites in the slavery system, and his endnotes and his footnotes prove otherwise. Savage Kingdom was a good one, and it gives you an idea of how the first colony was settled. The best book is Roanoke, which gives you a look at the only colony that was a pure Congregationalist colony that didn't bring any servants or slaves with them, and how they were totally screwed over. The Mayflower group, a third of those people were slaves, and all of them were white. All the slaves were white. This guy here who wrote Birthright, this is a story about Jimmy Anglesey, who was actually supposed to be a lord in Ireland. His uncle wanted his brother's fortune, so he sold this kid into slavery for 13 years. This kid eventually ran away, and he enlisted in the British Navy, and he got a letter from an admiral, and the admiral believed his story, and he came home, and for the rest of his life he waged a campaign with the King of England on his side and people in the Admiralty on his side against his uncle who sold him, and he never won.
God damn.
Okay? And it's like everybody in England believed him, but his uncle, well, I mean, his uncle tried to kill him. I mean, they would have bullies that would come after him and everything. But in this book, he actually gives you this one ad, and it's from a rare period. This thing is from, you see the distinctive hobo stick, okay, that this guy's got on his shoulder. They would give you an illustration of what this guy might look like when he ran away.
Okay.
And it says, £3 reward, run away, from the subscriber, living in Warwick, Furness. mine hole. On the instant, this Irish servant man named Dennis McCowan, about 5 feet 8 inches, 19 years of age, has a freckled face, white-colored curly hair, had on when he went away. And that halfway through all these descriptions, had on when he went away. There's a woman who's she does period tailoring for reenactments and stuff. She uses this because this is the only descriptions you really get of what poor people wore at the time.
Damn.
And so you'll go through this whole description of what the person was wearing. And, I mean, they would tell you if he had a yellow button on his coat and everything.
Wow.
Most of these people didn't have shoes. They were barefoot. And they're running away in Pennsylvania in January with no shoes.
Ooh.
So it must have been great. We were taught that indentured servitude was this really great thing. Now, this guy is an Irish serviceman. He's not an indentured servant. When they're indentured, they tell you. There's also something called a redemptioner, which is a type of indenture where you're just paying off your transportation.
I need to interrupt you real quick, but if you don't want to puddle on the floor, I need to go to the bathroom real quick. Okay? Yeah. So I'm just going to pause it. All right.
After the description of the clothing, which I had to do, I had to look up a lot of clothing stuff for the footnotes for this. You'll get a statement that starts with whoever. Whoever takes up said servant and secures him in any goal, so his master may get him again, shall have the above reward and reasonable charges paid by James Todd, which is not always a subscriber. Sometimes it's an agent. Benjamin Franklin, even though he was an escaped slave, and when he was young and was almost caught, he ended up running this printing press where he would take money and pay rewards for advertisements for escaped servants. And there's something else that started in 1741, where the Admiralty wrote a letter supporting slave owners over ship's captains. So imagine a society where you could get a letter like this, you could get a threat published in a newspaper, let's say in the Wall Street Journal, that me, a grocery store manager, I could threaten the commander of the USS Forrestal. Okay? All masters of vessels and others are forbid from harboring or carrying him off at their peril. That means you could be executed. Okay, so the Admiralty would back a shopkeeper whose slave clerk or weaver or whatever ran away against a captain. And it was so bad being one of these servants that they would run away and join the British Navy. And the British Navy was a horror show, okay, where you could be guaranteed at some point you're going to get whipped 200 times on the deck. Now, the fellow that wrote this book, Birthright, the true story that inspired Kidnap, is not a crackpot like me. He's actually a legitimate scholar. A. Roger Eckridge. He must be an important guy because his name starts with an initial instead of an actual word. He puts in here, from 1720 to 1760, Philadelphia newspapers printed advertisements for 2,400 white runaways from the Delaware Valley alone. Now, I do know from another book I got information that there were in Wilmington, Delaware, at a time when there were only 50 registered Negro slaves in the whole parish. There were, depending on the year, between 2,000 and 5,000 whites sold in the town of Newcastle. So Newcastle, which is now in Wilmington, that was the main port. The three main ports where you brought your slaves in from Europe were Jamestown until 1676, when Nathaniel Bacon burned it to the ground during the Slave Rebellion. There was Jamestown, there was Baltimore, there was Newcastle. That's where anybody going to Philadelphia market, they went in through Newcastle. And then there's Manhattan, where you had the Dutch mainly operated that people pipeline right there. Now, so all of our mythology built around the slavery and the great well of opportunity that was indentured servitude, it's just pure bullshit. So I'm lucky to get primary sources online. There's a guy named Thomas Hellier who thought he was signing up to be a school teacher in Virginia, and ended up being sold as a land clearance guy. So I'm writing a novel about his life right now, and his confession exists. He killed his master and his master's family.
Okay.
And then he wasn't a very good criminal. He was soon caught, and he was executed a couple days later, but he had a literate cellmate who actually took down a 16-page confession, which was preserved in the Library of Congress, which was sent to me as a picture PDF file, and Timbo has converted it to a text PDF.
Okay.
Which I can convert into a Word file, and then when I'm done annotating it, back into a PDF.
Okay.
So there you go. That's my main history project is this stuff. So I'm working on simultaneously. I'm working on Cracker Boy, wrapping that up.
Okay.
Which is a really big history of white slavery centered mostly around Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working on at the same time the 13th Tribe, which is really about white slavery in New England,
mm-hmm.
and white Indians and yellow Negroes. Okay, which is about all these runaway white people that ended up joining the Indian tribes.
Yeah. I actually just got finished listening to a podcast with Joe Rogan. He was interviewing this guy called Sebastian Younger.
Oh yeah, he's great. He wrote The Perfect Storm.
Yeah, and he also just his book called Tribe came out like a few months. I'd say about a year ago.
Is that the one about Battle Company that he was with in Afghanistan?
Well, yeah, he was a war correspondent. Right. Yeah, but he was saying about how his adoptive uncle that he had, who was Native American, I can't remember what tribe he was with, how he was saying that you have all these white people running to join the Indians, but not a single Indian joining white people. I mean,
that's right.
Yeah. I mean,
look at the guy. There's Warrior International, I think might be what it is. It's a Native American activist site that I subscribe to.
Okay.
And this guy works really hard. I think Zigzag is the main poster on this, where he posts like 5 articles a day on what's going on with pipeline revolts and mineral disputes between reservation tribes and the Canadians. It's mostly Canadian news.
Yeah.
And I go on occasionally and open up some of these, and all of these Indian activists not only look like people in my family, they have 100% European names. They don't even have American Indian names, and they're Native Americans.
Yeah.
That's Bill Johnson, the Native American chief.
Yeah.
And okay, he looks like my uncle.
Yeah.
No, not Uncle Robert, Uncle Bernie.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a guy named Goodrich who wrote a book called Scalp Dancer, which I had not read yet, but I listened to an interview with him about the mythology of how you had the vegetarian Plains Indians being victimized by the U.S. cavalry and blah blah blah, and that the Indians were real nice to you and they wouldn't do all the stuff to you. In reality, the Plains Indians would mainly butcher white men, women, and children. Most of the time. They would do some adoptions. And I have some accounts in a book right here that has some adoptions in it. Cannibalism, Headhunting, and Human Sacrifice in North America by George Franklin Feldman, who's actually like this. He was this Jewish guy that did talk radio. He was in politics. I think he was in real estate. And his hobby was archaeology. And he just randomly documents all this horrible stuff that whites and Indians had did to each other. This guy, Herman Lebeman, right here. Look at that guy. That looks like a Comanche chief.
Yeah.
He was kidnapped when he was a boy. He was taken from the lap of his grandmother, and he lived as an Indian, and he was a warrior, and he went out riding with these Indian warriors and butchered white people and raped white women, and he loved it. And he loved it so much that even after he was assimilated back into white society, at any opportunity, he would dress up in his Indian warrior costume.
Yeah, that guy's definitely, yeah.
Okay, so that was, he identified more, even with the Indians that were really arguably the nastiest to the whites, even though the whites were doing horrible stuff to the Indians at the same time here too. But when you get into accounts from this part of the United States, when you find about somebody that was captured by the Indians, most of the time they don't want to come back.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do. There were 2 women that did.
Mm-hmm.
The one woman was a psychopath who actually killed the women and children of the guys that kidnapped her. Okay. Because they left her in a camp with them, and then she butchers all the women and children with an axe. The other woman walked back from Ohio. She walked from Ohio to Virginia over the Appalachians. It's documented in a book. James Alexander Thom's excellent writer.
Mm-hmm.
He did a novelized version of her account. She wanted to get back to her husband. She left her 2 sons behind, and her one son refused to come back.
Okay.
That's a more balanced depiction there. There's a Kentucky state. There's a guy named Dragging Canoe, mm-hmm. who was married to the daughter of an English officer who also had I think her name was Mary, and she's credited with teaching the Cherokee how to do dairy farming. She picked up his rifle and fought in his stead after he was killed in this one battle. You see an illustration of this guy. This guy was a white guy
mm-hmm.
that was married to a white chick, and they were living as part of an Indian tribe.
Yeah.
So you can kind of, I'd say, think of bikers. Mm-hmm. Think if we had, outside of the suburbs, if all you had was the occasional kind of farm where you'd have a little fort on it, where you would have white people living there, and then everything else was the bikers.
Huh.
Okay, and they would be like the Indians, and it's not, the American Indians tended not to make racial distinctions like whites did. They were more interested in cultural distinctions.
Mm-hmm.
And you had, there are a lot of accounts from the Spanish and Portuguese settlement of different areas and of American seaborne exploration of the West Coast, where there were numerous accounts of sailors running off to join the Indians. And sometimes this didn't end well. I mean, sometimes these guys would just get killed by the Indians. But even so, their dream when they got on ship was they were getting out of a slavery situation, mm-hmm. and they were temporarily in a worse situation because the ship life was really nasty. But their dream was, when that ship docked, they would mutiny, but they would do what some of the guys did when Fletcher Christian mutinied, where they ran off into the inland areas to live with the natives.
Okay.
So because European society for a poor person was that nasty.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. It's kind of we identify with the rich elite Europeans of the past, mm-hmm. and we carry their story on. And except for books like A Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman, most of our accounts pay no attention whatsoever to what the normal life was mm-hmm. For the other people. And it's an agrarian society, so the people that do these great things that live on top of it, that we like to remember as our heroes, they're fed by this big slave machine that literally just eats up people underneath of them. In a more primitive society, tribal society, where it's more based on hunting, then...
Yeah, I mean, when you're a hunter-gatherer society, you can only live by what's on your back. You can't really accumulate things.
Yeah, they had a lot of the Native American societies were actually mixed, mm-hmm. Economically mixed. For instance, the Iroquois, the men hunted and gathered and fought, mm-hmm. and the women farmed. They had a system called the Three Sisters, mm-hmm. which was squash, beans, and corn.
Yeah. The
women produced that. And they also did a lot with nuts.
Mm-hmm.
And that saw them through the winter, when other tribes, the Iroquois, would derisively call the Algonquin tribes, they would call them tree eaters. Because in the wintertime, they're out there drinking tree sap, and they're peeling bark off the trees to get to the floury material between the bark and mm-hmm. the wood, and using that and making flour out of that, and trying to leach the toxins off of acorns and eat that, because they were just hunting and gathering. But the Iroquois, they also had this female farming system. So in the wintertime, you could live off of all of that stored food, and the men were free to go out and wage war. So you actually had the Iroquois wiping out a lot of Algonquin tribes because they could wage these genocidal wars after the harvest.
Okay.
And come back home and, eat what their women had grown all year long.
Damn. That's a pretty good system right there.
Yeah, they wiped out. Lake Erie was named after a tribe called the Erie, and Erie means raccoon. They rubbed out the raccoons. So somewhere along the line, they wiped out a tribe called the Big Waters that was based in West Virginia.
Okay.
It was the Lenni Lebat. I can't pronounce it.
Lenape.
Okay, so I think it means beautiful people.
Yeah, it does.
They didn't do too well under the pressure from the Iroquois. The Susquehannock, the last 20 of them were killed by a bunch of former white slaves called the Paxton Boys. But they were basically hunted to extinction by the Iroquois.
Yeah.
And the tribes in Maryland, like the Choptank and the Piscataway, they were hunted close to extinction by the Susquehannocks early on. So they actually asked the English settlers to settle as far north as possible. Largely, Baltimore got settled as an Indian initiative to get some guns and some protection up on the seacoast, because a ship with guns on it could offer you a certain amount of protection if you're living right on the sea.
Yeah. Hey, it's one way of surviving. I mean, oh God, I keep losing my.
So anyhow, the Appalachian Trail, the Iroquois call it the Long War Way. It's basically, something that because the Cherokees and Tuscarora were in the south, they were also Iroquois, which is just a French word that means longhouse people.
Yeah.
I think they called themselves the people of the Five Fire Council, and then they had their own separate tribes and clans within tribes, and the clans were totemic. But that was what the Appalachian Trail was for hunting people.
The Appalachian Trail was for hunting people.
Yeah.
I would have never guessed that.
Right. So if you think about it, in 1700, if you're some runaway Scottish boy and you're heading for the high ground,
there's a good chance you're going to die.
Yeah, and the people that are going to get guns and lead, shot, and gunpowder for bringing you back, you're crossing their human hunting trail when you're doing that. Two guys that survived the Roanoke disaster actually carved their name on a tree in the Blue Ridge Mountains. They actually made it that far anyhow.
Wow.
And it's toss of the dice. Do they kill you? Do they return you for guns and powder? Or do they adopt you?
Yeah.
If you're a man, if you're a white man, they're just going to kill you. Okay, because you're worthless. You're just a woman with a dick to them. Because you're a farmer, you're a slave. But if you're a woman, you have obvious value. And
if you're a child,
you can be raised as one of them because they don't have a racialist view of things.
Yeah.
So it's being a 40-year-old dude, you don't want to be grabbed by any Indians.
Yeah, you're dead or sold back.
Yeah, they're gonna take pine sap and put it on pine needles, and they're gonna bed that in your skin. They're gonna light it on fire, and they're gonna cut your junk off while they're dancing around you. Yeah, it's going to be a bad deal. You save the last bullet for yourself.
Fun.
But in the black powder period, you've only got one bullet.
Yeah. Oh God.
So my favorite guy is Lewis Wetzel. His father was an indentured servant, and they moved to Wheeling, West Virginia, and him and his brother got kidnapped, and they escaped. And after that, he spent his life hunting Indians. And the Indians called him, they called him, they had two different names for him, Old Deathwind and the man whose gun is never empty. So he had a system for using smaller caliber ball in his rifle.
Yeah.
And loading it by spitting the ball down the barrel. So he didn't have to ramrod it home. he would sneak up on the group because most of the hunting parties were 3 to 5 guys. The Shawnees would use a lot of 3-man parties. He'd sneak up on them and he'd kill one of them. And then he'd run away while he was reloading. And anytime he showed up in civilization, it was only to win contests where they would have who's the fastest. And he would always win the marksmanship and the running. He was always the fastest guy. He would then outrun the 2 that were chasing him while he was reloading. He'd turn around and he'd shoot one of them. Mm-hmm. And now it's him and the other guy. And he might continue the same thing, running away and reloading again, or depends on whether the other guy still had a loaded weapon or what, how he would kill him. And it seemed he claimed to have scalped over 40 men. He let his hair grow all the way down to his knees because he wanted to have a worthy scalp for people to try to collect. He ended up dying of pneumonia, I think, down in the southern United States somewhere. And his gun was called Old Kill Devil, and his brother's wife insisted that the gun be buried with him because she thought it would haunt the house.
Yeah. Well,
but the reality is, most of the dudes that he killed were probably white dudes.
Probably, yeah. So that's a crappy way to go out. Pneumonia for a guy that's named Old Deathwind.
Right. Well, it was apropos for that name.
Yeah,
anyhow.
That's a great name.
Right. But because you would use the guys that were adopted into the tribe would usually be more fanatical fighters. Mm-hmm. You know, like these ISIS guys. A lot of these really fanatical ISIS guys were European guys that went and joined. Mm-hmm. You know, so they need to get more cred because they don't actually come from the ethnic group of the tribe they're getting into.
Yeah.
You know, so he probably physically did in a lot of white dudes that had become Indians. Mm-hmm. Damn. You know, but you know what? More power to them. I would rather get killed by Louis Wetzel than die digging a ditch while some guy was cussing at me, calling me a goddamn Irish pig, and beating me with a stick.
Yeah. You know? I mean, that's what I want to go out to, yeah.
Okay, so I'm sorry I ran on so long about that.
Oh, no.
It's just too much stuff. Too much of this has been funneling through my brain. After I get these 3 nonfiction and 1 fiction book done, I on this White Slavery thing, and I plan on just trying to do 1 book a year on the subject.
Okay.
And it'll probably be a fiction book because I've already produced like 3,000 words on this, and I'm going to be adding another 2,000 to it. It's already its own little library. Mm-hmm. So after I'm done these 4 books, I'll probably just continue to do different sequels of Sold, mm-hmm. Which is the name of the book on Thomas Hellier, but it's really from the perspective of a kid that's kind of I kind of composited Jimmy Anglesey and Peter Williamson for this character, but more from his perspective than Thomas Hellier's perspective, because Thomas Hellier is not a very sympathetic character. He was an asshole. Mm-hmm. He actually borrowed money from everybody in his village in England and then left, and his father had to sell himself to the hometown as the town slave to pay off the debt.
Oh, God damn.
And on his way to England to get drinking money, he robbed a beggar. This guy was begging for alms on the street, and he reached out his hand, and the guy opened up his hand, already had some coin in it, and he took the coin. Okay, so I didn't want to write the whole thing from his perspective because he's an asshole.
Yeah. Shit.
So what I do is the guy that was begging alms,
yeah.
I make that a washed-up boxer that gets tossed out by his patron because he loses a fight and he gets maimed and he can't fight anymore. And then the kid that gets sold, the main sympathetic character is the kid. So I think after I'm done that, just once a year I'll write a novel or a bunch of short stories about what might have happened. I had that one little indent that it wasn't indentured. He was an Irish servant. That one Irish servant ad that I just read. Mm-hmm. That's all the information I have on these people. So what I'd like to do is write short stories or novels about what might have happened with these people, particularly the most interesting characters, like the guy that was a stage actor.
Yeah,
you got. I've found from the 1770s 3 runaway school teachers, which I just thought was hilarious.
3 runaway school teachers.
Yeah. I called up a girlfriend who used to be a school teacher. And I told her, I said, "You think you had it bad?" I said, "These school teachers, they used to be slaves.
Mm-hmm.
The people owned you, and you had to teach their brat kids. So you actually had school teachers. It was like real education's running away, and that was a problem. Anytime somebody that was illiterate ran away, that was a problem because they could forge their own passes. Our current our identification, our driver's license, and our passports are really based on these indenture forms and freedom papers. So if you were an indentured servant, there were 2 parts to your servant form. And after you finished your term, you would get both parts countersigned by you and your master that you had finished your term. But if you were just a regular servant, which most people were, you would just get a form that says that you were free. And it would be signed. Then you would have to take that form to the local authority and get permission to travel. And then he would give you a pass. It's okay for you to leave this province. So even if you got your freedom paper, if you went to the local magistrate in Philadelphia and he wouldn't give you a freedom pass, you couldn't leave Pennsylvania.
Oh, shit.
And if you ever lost this piece of paper or got caught without this piece of paper, the gaoler, which is what they called a jailer because he kept a goal, he would just snap you up and sell you.
Damn.
And they basically, they would auction these people off after a certain amount of time.
Shit.
Yeah.
Sucks.
Yeah, because being jobless was against the law. That's a felony. You could be sold for that. Being penniless, against the law, felony. You could be sold for that. In England, they had a series of vagabond acts. The most notorious one was from 1572, which basically outlawed traveling without owning property at the same time.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Damn.
Yeah, so if you travel, it better be on a horse because you got proof that you own property. And you should have a sword and a pistol. And the best proof you can have that you're a free person is to own somebody.
Okay.
So people don't realize that. And even in the South, after the Revolutionary War, they would go out and they would kidnap white people, and they called it Virginia Fair Play. It was also a torture that they used for blacks, where they would smoke you over a tobacco fire in a tobacco shed. But when they did it to whites, they did it to stain them brown so that they could say that they were little quadroon kids.
Okay.
They had been born on the plantation.
God damn.
So that's
Yeah.
Was that uplifting enough for you, Corey?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
All right.
Well, at least you're not Irish, right?
Oh fuck.
What's your last name? What name? Bracken?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
it means bad water in Irish. Well, I mean, you.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, so they probably had your people draining swamps.
Well, considering how big we are, we can probably hail an awful lot. But seriously, my entire family's just as big as I am, so...
Yeah, so you people were bred to drain swamps, right? You're tall enough you wouldn't drown.
Yeah, true. Average height 6'5", so yeah.
Body mass helps with your buoyancy. You couldn't have a little bone shirt, little bone racks like me.
At least we had a job. All right, let's go into the more uplifting stuff, like I'm getting chased down in Baltimore. What are some of the more recent stories of your travels in this great city of Baltimore?
There's been in the county where I work in. You want to give some green umbrella stories?
Sure, yeah. Let's
The green hero umbrella, this bent umbrella.
Sure.
I think this pit bull thought it was protecting its master, who was a small, hunched figure of indistinct race and sex. It was at night, 10 o'clock at night. This pit bull charged at me. I switched grips on this, and I used this thing like a bayonet. As it leaped from my either chest, face, or throat, I stabbed it in the chest, and then I used this like an oar, and I directed it past me, and my back went to a tree. It went after me again. I stabbed him again, and directed him the other way, and then I shimmied around the tree, and then I backed up into the street on Waukegan Boulevard and stepped away, and it didn't follow me off the curb. Okay, that was one of two pit bull attacks. But there was another attack. Another thing. It is an attack because the guy was coming to get me and he just stopped because I became belligerent. I'm putting this in Magic Negroes and White Devils, okay, which is an ongoing project. It's just about all the cool experiences I've had with black guys, and black guys that have been my mentors before. This wasn't exactly that, but I think it shows the White Devil part. I'm walking past Universal Pizzeria around 10 o'clock at night, but behind Immaculate Heart of Mary Church, where I got beat up when I was 6 years old, first day of first grade. And two black dudes are getting out of the car. One guy is like your size, but not quite as tall. Other guy's tall, skinny string bean, mid-20s, both of them. Big dude points at me and says something to skinny dude. Now, these guys are headed into the pizzeria, presumably to get something to eat. Yet, this big dude details the skinny dude to go after me. Just, I guess, crime of opportunity or sport or whatever it was supposed to be. He starts walking towards me with this George Jefferson strut. And I had already, this was after I did the Kevin Michael Grace interview, and I had said bad things about the Baltimore City Police. And I was having nightmares about being tortured by cops in my girlfriend's basement. And I woke up with a hangover because I was having to get drunk to get to sleep. And I just didn't feel like it. So I stop in the middle of the street. This guy's coming right at me. And I get in a guard position like this, like I'm on the line at Rourke's Rift, with my bayonet against the Zulus, right? And I just look right at him, and I got this thing pointed at his belly, and I'm going to skewer him. And he stops, and he looks back at the other guy indignantly and puts his hands out like, what the hell? And the other guy just laughs and yells, "Sorry, wrong white man." Well, yeah, so I was like, oh, there's a random white dude. Let's just beat the shit out of him.
Yeah, why not?
Now, there's, this same umbrella I had getting off the bus at Old Eastern and Stemmers Run. There's two dudes waiting at the bus stop. Nobody waits and catches the bus at this bus stop because it's near the end of the line. Yeah. And also nobody stays at these bus stops at night because it's too dangerous. Too many people get attacked. It's just a ghost town at night. I get off there, I'm like the last man on earth, and there's maybe one person on that bus where there used to be 25. And the bus driver would generally look out for me. He's like, "You sure you want to get off here?" And I was like, "Yeah." And there's these two guys. This was graduation night, Friday night this year. Good looking, middleweight, 18-year-old guys. Okay. Both like 6'1", 160. White skinned black dudes. Nice looking guys, kind of guys that white chicks probably fantasize about, blowing, So they see me getting off the bus and they don't get on. They put their hoods up, they zip their hoodie up, they put their hands in their pockets as I get off the bus. And then I stand next to them as I shift my green umbrella to my left hand so I can get to my knife with my right hand. And they have a conversation. And then I see Eunice, who's an old African lady, who blares this, she listens to this televangelist, this white guy from Louisiana. And she blares it on her smartphone, and she stands back in a bus shelter like it's her Christian cave, and she's going to keep all the people away. I'm wondering if they're going to go after her or me, because it's the only two people here, and they're obviously up to no good. So I walk across the street, and they start to cross. I cut into the parking lot behind the bus shelter where Eunice is at to see if they're going to mess with her or not. If they're going to mess with her, I'm going to come back, because she actually helped me out before. And when I initially ran into her, I was really rude to her. And I used to just leave her there by herself when I could have stayed and waited for the next bus instead of walking. So I had a little bit of guilt going on there. So I noticed that they walked past her. They're trying to cut me off. They know I'm going through the lot to get up Eastern Avenue. Of course, they're going to walk faster than me. They're a lot taller than me. I get up on the sidewalk, and they come up to my back, and I turn, and I stop. And I hold this thing like this in my left hand, so I could just spear one of them back while I get my knife out and go to work. And they stop and have a conversation. I continue onward. 3 more times, I think. This was a while ago. 3 more times this happens. They stop and they have a conversation. And they still continue to follow me. I cross the street to the other side. Now that we're in the park. Now they're picking up speed. So now they're trying to cut me off before I get to Middle River Bridge. Because there's no place to go other than across that bridge from here, because it's just a few residences. And I'm obviously heading somewhere with a backpack on. So I finally say to myself, when I pass Gussie's Liquors, this is it. I'm stopping. I'm turning around. If these guys are still doing the same thing, I'm crossing the street. I'm going after them, because I'm not going to have them hit me up there, because that park's a lot darker.
Yeah.
And I turn around, and they've already decided to head back the other way.
Okay. It's
taken them 8 minutes now to decide whether or not to hit me or not. So maybe their first night at the rodeo. I'm standing at Glen Oak and Northern Parkway a little bit later in the summer. It was July. During July, we're having these torrential rains with no thunder. And I'm already pretty wet, standing at Glen Oak and Northern Parkway. These 2 brothers, one guy's a nice looking light heavyweight, the other guy's a middleweight. They're in these soaked gray hoodies, and they're walking up the other side of the road. And I hear one of them yell, "Yo, can I hold that umbrella?" I don't say anything. Then the deeper voice, the heavier guy, because they're both 6'1", 6'2", says, "Yo, that's my umbrella." Well, you know it's on then. That's what they say to the kid before you take his bite.
Yeah.
So now I look at them, and they're coming abreast of me on the other side of Northern Parkway, and the guy says, "Bring me that umbrella here." And I don't say anything. So now I've got my hand on my knife in my pocket, and I finally find a use for the gut. Okay, I use the gut to conceal my belly, to conceal the deployment of the knife, and it just looks like I'm sliding my hand across. And I open the knife under my belly. I do not cut myself. Okay, and I hold it under my gut. Well, because I've got my umbrella. I can't fight with a Hero green umbrella because it's over my head, keeping me dry. So I'm holding this knife down here. Then they stop right across from me, and the big guy says, "You better bring me that umbrella, or I'm going to come over there and whoop that old ass." So I slide my hand down on my thigh. And now this blade it was a miracle I could open it with one hand. You see, I have trouble opening this thing with my messed up hand. Now this blade's blackened. So I hold it down here. I don't think it's going to be seen, but apparently the street light that I'm standing under cast light off of that edge where it's sharpened. The other dude sees it. He points at my leg as this guy's stepping off the curb to come get me, and he says, "Yo, Santa Claus is serious as shit, yo." And then, so I'm basically, Arsenio Hall and Eddie Murphy have decided to take my umbrella, and now it's not going their way. So now they break into their comedy routine. And the other guy, the muscle guy, he backs up like a reverse cartoon onto the curb. He doesn't turn around and step up. He backs up as if I got a gun or something like that. And he's holding his hands in front of him. Maybe he doesn't know it's a knife. The other dude just telling him that I got something. And he's holding his hands in front of him, and he says, "Merry Christmas." I forget if he saw me Santa Claus or not. The other guy already called me Santa Claus. And then he said, "Green is my favorite color." I get on the bus. Then I get off at the same dump between the Aldi's and the thrift store at Old Eastern and Stemmer's Run, and it's still pouring down rain. And I cross the street, and I'm going through the parking lot. It's after midnight because now the lights are off at the Aldi's, and there's this dude that's your size, but he's got a bigger ass. He's like one of those big pear-shaped black dudes that looks like he could be an offensive lineman.
Okay.
And he's got a big black umbrella. And I'm like, well, thank God he's got an umbrella. But I don't think I can get my knife through all of that. And if I go and stab him in the neck, it's going to look like murder.
Yeah.
So I divert away from him because we're going to go shoulder to shoulder. Now, there's an iron fence behind me that makes a square. I'm boxed in. as soon as I do this, I cut off 45 degrees so that I'm going to walk like 15 feet to his left. But I'm still not walking right into the fence. I'm taking some extra time and giving some extra space out of respect that this dude could obviously run me over. And then he adjusts to come right at me. So now he's not even heading for the other opening. Okay, he's got to be coming at me, because if he's not, he's planning on walking through the iron fence, which is one of those fences that looks like the kind of fence that on Planet of the Apes, the new one, where the apes ripped it apart and used them as spears that they were throwing. It's that kind of fence. He's not walking through it. So I'm like, this guy's coming right at me. I can't go any more to the right. I'm now going to collide in 5 steps with this dude that's got me by 20 years and 200 pounds. So I put my hand on my knife. I'm pretty confident the hand is going to open this knife, because it did earlier. This is a quick folder, and so it doesn't come out easy like the other one, and my hand's all messed up from goons like you hitting my hand. Yeah, you broke one of my fingers.
Oh, I did?
Yeah, you broke that one.
Oh, damn.
Yeah, that one's been broken twice, and one time you did it. The other time was Charles. So when he's just like 2 or 3 steps from running me over, he looks down at my hip where my hand is, and then he diverts again back on his original course. Yeah, I'm like, still, let's say I have the knife out, I'm still not confident that I get this through him, because he's so damn big.
You want to pause? All right, I'm going to pause this.
Anyways, but I think that's all the Green Umbrella stories right there.
Okay.
Just about. I think there was like one other one, but that was for a previous period. So that's just Green Umbrella stories from this summer.
All right, well, we'll get into any more stories next time, because I know you have to be getting out of here.
Okay. Yeah, we'll do T-Cane stories next time. All the times I've used...
yeah, we can go with a story for each one.
the T-Cane to defend myself. Okay.
All right, well, it was good talking to you again, Jim.
Well, thank you, Corey. I appreciate your attention to my blooming psychosis.
All right, now if you want to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
You want to go to JamesLaFond.com or James LaFond Blogspot.
Okay.
You could, if you're not a reader, if you're one of the more physical people out there, then you could go to the Crackpot Podcast YouTube channel or to Lynn Lockhart's YouTube channel. There's only 2 Lynn Lockharts on YouTube. One of them is a black chick that sings the blues, and the other one is this highly intelligent lady who interviews crazy people.
Okay, like yourself. All right. Well, that's it, everybody.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Remember, if you want to contact Jim, go to JamesLaFond.com or James LaFond Blogspot. If you want to contact me, Twitter, Roaming Viking, Instagram, The Roaming Viking. Go to roamingviking.com. Actually, everything's going to be linked below. Also, remember, net neutrality is important for all of us. Go to battleforthenet.com. Link down below. We need to stop this. And remember, contact your congressman. Get them to stop them going forward with net neutrality. Well, getting rid of net neutrality. This affects all of us. Thanks for listening. Until next time.